It's Brian Preston, the Money Guy.
Yeah, I think another headwind that we're seeing, obviously, that you ought to think about if you're part of the FIRE movement, is there are big life checkpoints that are happening later and later. When you look at the statistics right now, the median age for a first marriage is now 30 years old for women, 30 years old for men, 29 years old for women. 50 years ago, this was not the case. The median age of first-time home buyers is now 33. That's much later than it has been historically. And then if you look at the average age that couples or women specifically have their first child, it's usually around 27 years. So if you're having some of these major life-altering, life-changing events happen later in life, it's likely going to push your timeline out. So you need to make sure if you are part of the FIRE movement, or if you desire to be part of the FIRE movement, you understand where these big life changes fit into the overall plan.
Well, anybody who's part of this movement will know some of the biggest people who have been the most vocal, the content creators, where they've actually fallen back into the workforce is because of life. Mm-hmm. It's these things right here. Because look, if you're getting married later, if you're buying your house later, if you've got kids in the house much later, there's a lot of things that can change there, where daycare cost of college, if you have a special needs child out of the blue, all these things can have a huge impact on the tell of what your life and financial decisions are. Make sure that's built into the process. Now, Bo, I'm excited to kind of talk about this next thing because this is the nerdiness that we're built for. Yep. And I know that within the FIRE movement, this is the type of stuff that my financial mutants who are considering leaving the workforce early, you love to nerd out on this stuff. And we didn't want you to think we weren't going to throw some numbers in here, but sequence of return risk. I mean, look, we're right now in the middle of a downturn. We're full on bear market. Yep. A lot of indicators saying we might be in a recession right now. That's kind of scary if you're one of these people thinking about leaving the workforce, especially in your best earning years. Talk to us about sequence of return. Yeah,
if you've read any sort of financial media or FIRE media, you know one of the hottest button topics is the time at which I choose to retire matters. And I could be very, very lucky in that timing, or I could be very, very unlucky in that timing. And we want to show you a very practical example, again, using a case study. Let's say that you have two investors. One of them wants to retire on January 1st of 2000. The other wants to retire on January 1st of 2003. They are both going to retire with $2 million. So we're going to assume the same portfolio value, just different time of when they leave the workforce. They're also both going to have the same income needs. They're going to withdraw 5% or $100,000 annually from their portfolio. So on the cuff, it doesn't sound crazy. 5% withdrawal rate, $2 million portfolio. I think what you have to think about is when you retire, when you go into financial independence, there's a psychological shift that takes place. And we see this time and time again with our retirees, that when you can no longer use your hands and your back and your brain to go out and make money, and now you have to count on your army of dollar bills to work for you, there is a shift that happens. And we were with people in the Great Recession when this was going on. And I want you to imagine you're in that moment. Investor A, in the downturn of 2009, at the very low part of 2009, the one who retired right before the dot-com bubble bursting, saw their portfolio value that was at $2 million at retirement drop down to $993,000. So you have to believe they're starting to think, oh man, I'm pulling $100,000 a year out of my portfolio, and I've now crossed below that $1 million mark. This is frightening. This is scary. Just using simple arithmetic, I don't know how much longer this will last. Investor B, on the other hand, because they got quote unquote lucky and didn't retire right before a downturn, on March of 2009, their portfolio is actually worth $1.3 million.
Yeah, it is one of those things where I think a lot of people, we look at this and we just assume, I've saved up this chunk of money, I will be okay. Mm-hmm. But we don't realize the stress. I mean, it is hard going from builder, meaning you've always been saving, you're very disciplined, to now consumer or destroyer of the wealth that you, because in a way, in a sad way, you are kind of going the other way with it, where now you're breaking down what you spent decades building. And that's just a hard general mindset. And you think about when you hit market cycles where the the economy's in a downturn and people are struggling, it's not uncommon for you to have a psychological coping mechanism, especially if you're working. When the market starts getting beaten up, you're like, it's okay. I'm not retiring yet. I'm going to keep saving. I'm taking advantage. I'm a financial mutant. I'm buying cheap shares right now. But think about the fact that once you've left the workforce, it hits you from a psychological standpoint of a much more desperate feeling, and the fact that now you are not in control. And there's something about humans and our ability to want to control the situation, to control all the angles that are coming in, and you will feel very helpless and very vulnerable from this. And then to know that, because here's the other thing I think is interesting. Somebody starts at $2 million. They start living off these assets for a decade. And you've 10 years in the future, now that those assets are already down, because you've consumed the principle of it. That is a very scary thing, because if you're still pulling the $100,000 a year, you're way beyond that 5% safe withdrawal rate that you originally started retirement at. Now, look, I hate being a pessimist, so let's turn this around and talk about the glass half full. I tell this to my clients right now too. Sometimes facing from a contrarian standpoint, when we're in the middle of a bear market, it could be also a tailwind to your back, meaning that this could actually be an opportunity, as if we boomerang back with our V-shaped recovery, that this might actually work out pretty good. So we've given them all the negative stuff, Bo, by showing that their asset values have gone down. If you were historically going back in time to 2000 to 2009, what's the rest of the story if these people stayed invested?
Yeah, the rest of the story now, with hindsight being 2020, is the investor who retired right before the dot-com bubble burst. Their portfolio recovered value as of June of this year, with a 60-40 portfolio, they'd have about $1.6 million. So their plan worked. Now, they didn't know that in March of 2009, but they worked. But look at this. The investor who timed it right, who retired with lower sequence of return risk, they actually have $2.7 million as of June of this year. That is a $1.1 million difference in retirement assets by factoring in and understanding the way that sequence of return risk works. This is why people tell you the first few years of retirement, first few years of financial independence are some of the most important to make sure you don't draw down the portfolio.
Now, look, you said something there, and I don't know if you meant to say it, but you said who timed it right. But nobody can time it.
Nobody knows.
Let's just say it. They got lucky.
They got lucky.
So let's make sure. How can we get rid of as much luck or chance out of this scenario as possible? I think the best way for us to do that is to look at the safe withdrawal rate. Remember, now, the best, as you get closer to retirement, you're going to talk to somebody, you're going to stress test this, you're going to run it through Monte Carlo simulations. But if you're still decades from retirement, it is important to kind of look at this, understand this concept of safe withdrawal rate, because that is what's going to keep you from consuming the principal as you retire. And we've actually got a lot of research here that we want to kind of show you on why it makes sense to pay attention to how long your retirement is to what you actually pull out of your portfolio.
Yeah, it's interesting. If we are retiring earlier, and then because of advances in medical technology, we're living longer, our retirements are expanding, so safe withdrawal rate has to become something that we think about. There's a great chart. This was done by thepoorswiss.com, and this is just kind of the Trinity study that kind of tested and sort of benchmarked the 4% withdrawal rate, shows how the success rate of withdrawal rates lasts over a 30-year retirement from 1871 all the way till 2021 with different portfolio allocations, 100% bonds, 25% stocks, 50% stocks, 75% stocks, and 100% stocks. If you look at all of these portfolios and you're aiming for a probability of success somewhere above 75, you can see that the safe withdrawal rate for most of these portfolios is between 4 to 4.5 years, 4 to 4.5% if you're thinking about a 30-year retirement. But for financial independence, retire early, they're not thinking about 30-year retirements.
Yeah, by the way, this is one of those things, I love when people are just as nerdy as us. I mean, because the Poor Swiss has actually created a really valuable resource here in the fact that the historical Trinity study was based on a 30-year retirement. Man, remember, it came out at 4% safe withdrawal rate, but they came back later and said, if you have over 50% of your assets in risk assets, if you add some asset allocation, diversification in there, and then based upon what's been going on with recent market performance, it's actually been increased up to about 4.5%. And I think it's amazing if you just look at this, somewhere between the 50 to 75% stock portfolio lines here, you can see how beautiful that 4.5% rate, because I really say you don't have success if you look at that success rate unless it's well over 75%. Right. Because who wants to lead the workforce while you're in your peak earning years if you only have a 50-50 coin toss chance of having success? No, you want to make sure that definitely the needle's pointing towards you can do this. So 30 years, we know that the kind of gold standard is about 4.5% safe withdrawal rate. Now, the problem, Bo, and you and I have had a lot of conversation on this, life expectancies are going up, plus people are retiring earlier, especially when they're part of this movement of the financial independence, retire early. What happens when you extend this out to 50 years?
Yeah, you can see the poor Swiss, again, he updated his chart showing the 50-year results from 1871 to 2021. And you can see that every one of these allocations actually shifted left. If we exclude the completely conservative 100% bond portfolio and you look at the success rate to be above 75%, it's actually somewhere between 3.5% to 4.5%. So 4.5% is no longer the standard. It's kind of the higher end of the safe with sustainable withdrawal rate over the long term. So this means that our guidelines for how we look at safe withdrawal rate probably ought to be affected by how long we anticipate and think that we're going to be in retirement.
And that leads to kind of a good closing point here on that. I think if you want to ensure the best chance that you will have enough to weather whatever financial storm the markets throw at you, is be more conservative on that safe withdrawal rate when you're doing your planning. We've actually put together kind of some guidelines here to let you think about how long you'll be retired and what that means, what you should do using your planning rates.
Yeah, so this is taking this data and putting a little money guy sprinkle on it. We think if your retirement's going to be less than 30 years, 4% sustainable withdrawal rate likely makes sense for planning purposes. If you're going to be retired from 30 to 40 years, you should drop your withdrawal rate to 3.5%. From 41 to 50 years of retirement, you should look at a 3% safe withdrawal rate. And if you're someone who's planning on being retired from 51 to 60 years, you should probably think about a 2.5% withdrawal rate to make sure that you get to be in control of what financial independence looks like instead of having circumstances around you control what the rest of your life looks like.